Title: The Trial of Walter Boone. Courtroom 5 of the Ashton County District Courthouse carried the heavy air of bureaucracy and routine. Papers shuffled, heels clicked against polished linoleum, and conversations echoed in hushed tension. It was just after 9 when the gallery filled. People lined the pews, a mix of attorneys, interns, and curious spectators, all anticipating another morning of minor misdemeanors and tedious proceedings. At the bench sat Judge Nathaniel Whitmore, a man with a reputation as rigid as the collar on his perfectly pressed robe. His gavel had brought down harsh sentences and even harsher rebukes over the years. He ruled with impatience, rarely smiling, and never hesitating to remind the courtroom who held authority. He thumbed through case files with the weariness of someone who'd seen it all, and perhaps thought he knew it all too. The court clerk stood and called the next case. The State of Georgia versus Walter Boone. Charge: criminal trespass on private property. A murmur moved through the courtroom as the large wooden doors creaked open. All eyes turned. The man who entered did not match the mental image of a defendant in criminal court. Walter Boone was elderly, his frame thin but upright. He wore a worn brown trench coat buttoned all the way up, slacks that hung slightly loose on his legs, and shoes that had clearly seen more decades than most people in the room. A simple wool cap sat on his head, and he leaned on a cane carved from oak, with initials branded into the handle. R.B. He walked slowly but purposefully down the aisle toward the defendant's table, eyes scanning the room. His presence silenced even the most cynical observers. Something about him felt deliberate, familiar, even noble, but not to Judge Whitmore. The judge chuckled under his breath, then raised an eyebrow, amused. "Mr. Boone," he said, glancing at the case file with mock gravity, "it appears this isn't your first offense for trespassing. You've been warned before, and yet here we are again. Is there a reason for your continued disregard of the law?" Walter stopped, met the judge's eyes, and replied with a voice low and steady, "It wasn't a mistake, Your Honor." That answer gave the room pause. Judge Whitmore tilted his head. "Oh? You mean to say you intentionally entered private property, even after your last case?" Walter nodded, leaning slightly more on his cane. "I was visiting a place I've known my entire life." The judge narrowed his eyes. "You were caught at the Brookhaven estate, which, as you well know, has been privately owned for the last 6 years. It was public for decades before that," Walter said calmly. "My father was the caretaker there. He tended those grounds. I learned to fish on that lake." The judge exhaled. "With all due respect, Mr. Boone, nostalgia is not a legal defense. That land has changed ownership. You no longer have a right to be there. It's that simple." Walter smiled faintly. "I'm aware." Judge Whitmore leaned back in his chair, growing irritated. "Then why were you there?" The old man shifted his weight and looked straight at the judge. "Because there's something you need to know." A ripple of curiosity moved through the room. Attorneys exchanged glances. Some leaned forward, intrigued. The judge slammed his palm on the bench. "Let's not play games. This is a court of law, Mr. Boone. If you've broken the law, there will be consequences." He removed his glasses and tossed them on the bench with theatrical frustration. "Where is your counsel?" "I don't need a lawyer," Walter replied. "You're representing yourself?" "No, I'm not defending myself at all." The courtroom went still. Judge Whitmore stared at him. "Then what exactly are you doing?" Walter looked down at his cane, then back up. "Requesting a phone call." The gallery murmured, stunned. A few even chuckled. Whitmore frowned. "You're not under arrest. You're not in custody. You're in court. You don't get a phone call." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Then may I inform my daughter that I may be spending the next 30 days in jail?" The judge sighed, gestured to the bailiff. "Fine. Make your call. Let's get this farce over with." Walter pulled a flip phone from his coat pocket and dialed. The number rang once. "It's time," he said simply, and hung up. The courtroom doors swung open. Gasps rippled across the room as a tall woman stepped in, dressed in a black tailored coat, dark heels clicking in perfect rhythm. 2 sharply dressed men followed her, carrying briefcases. She walked straight to Walter and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Dad?" She said gently. Are you all right? Heads turned. Phones were drawn. Whispered names bounced around the courtroom. It was Charlotte Boone, the CEO of Boone Industries, head of the Boone Foundation, one of the top 50 most powerful women in global finance, featured in Forbes, Fortune, and the Wall Street Journal, and the daughter of the man the judge had just tried to humiliate. Judge Whitmore stiffened. Miss Boone, he said, regaining composure. This court is in session. You're not permitted to approach the bench or represent your father without proper filing. I'm not here to testify, Charlotte interrupted, her voice cool and controlled. I'm here to correct a mistake. She stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the clerk's desk. Your Honor, this file includes documentation regarding my father's status, the status of the Brookhaven estate, and several things you failed to consider before treating him like a common criminal. Whitmore opened the file hesitantly. His face paled. Walter Boone is the founder and retired chairman of Boone Industries, Charlotte announced. A philanthropist, veteran, and primary donor to the Brookhaven Historical Society, the land he was found on. He's in the process of purchasing it. These are the sale contracts. Gasps again. Some reporters outside the courtroom could now be heard calling into newsrooms. He requested access to inspect the property before finalizing the transfer. He was denied twice, despite presenting written documentation. Security threw him off the land. And when he returned a third time, unarmed, non-threatening, entirely peaceful, they called the police. No one cared to check who he was or why he was there. Judge Whitmore, white-knuckled at the bench, stared at the papers. I wasn't aware of that, Charlotte cut in, is precisely the problem. You saw an elderly man in plain clothing and assumed he was poor, or lost, or a threat. She stepped back and turned to face the gallery. This court did not fail because of a technical error. It failed because of assumption, because appearance mattered more than truth. The air in the courtroom had shifted completely. All eyes were now on the judge, no longer the symbol of authority, but the target of scrutiny. Walter finally spoke again. I didn't come here to win a case, he said softly. I came to see what justice still looks like in this country. Judge Whitmore swallowed hard. I've spent my life building communities, Walter said. I believed in this system. But today, I was treated like a problem to be removed. Charlotte stepped forward again. We are filing a formal complaint. Your Honor, once you render your verdict, we will also be pursuing civil action for defamation, unlawful treatment, and emotional distress. Judge Whitmore nodded slowly, no longer in control, barely able to lift his voice. Case dismissed, he muttered. Charges dropped. But it wasn't enough. Walter didn't smile. He simply stood and looked the judge in the eye. You didn't just make a mistake, he said. You reminded everyone watching that justice still bends to the way someone looks. And that's something none of us can afford to ignore anymore. Charlotte turned to her father and took his arm. Let's go home, Dad. When they stepped out of the courtroom, the media swarmed them. The story hit headlines before the hour was over. Judge humiliates elderly man in court. Turns out to be billionaire philanthropist. Boone family declares legal action against court misconduct. Power, prejudice, and a courtroom reckoning. The incident sparked more than outrage. It led to new training mandates for court officials across the state. Judicial oversight committees reopened old cases. And quietly, a ripple of change moved through the justice system. As for Judge Whitmore, his reputation never recovered. His ruling was overturned. His name became a cautionary tale in law school ethics lectures. And Walter Boone, he finalized the purchase of the Brookhaven estate, then donated it to the county for use as a public park and youth mentorship center. The sign at the front entrance reads, "The Boone Grounds, where justice grows stronger with every step." Because some stories don't end in the courtroom, they begin there, and sometimes one quiet man and one phone call are all it takes to remind the world what dignity really looks like.